is on the topic stakeholder management, getting the stakeholder involved. And for this, I would like to invite on stage Mr. Suhrid Brahma, who is the CTO at WNS Global Services. Giving a brief introduction, Mr. Suhrid leads WNS Technology Services as well as enterprise application terms that are focused on delivering technology-led solutions for WNS customers and the enterprise itself. He works closely with the business unit leaders in creating and delivering solutions based on WNS IP and partner platforms with the focus on business outcome. WNS Technology Group has launched multiple industry-specific solutions and cross-industry solutions as a part of WNS Tractem suite. Prior to WNS, Suhrid has worked with PwC, GE, Genpact, Deloitte, and Wipro. And with this, please welcome him with a huge round of applause.
So, I understand this is probably the last speaker session. So my job is difficult than others. But anyway, I think I won't take too much time, but would be happy to keep it engaging with all of you. And of course, then I think we have another panel discussion after this, right, Swapnali? Okay, so we'll get started, so while the slide comes up, let me just take one word, from the session, stakeholder, right? And I was given a brief that set of stakeholders, right? Like if you're the CIO or an IT leader, you have a defined set of stakeholders who would be a CFO or a BU head or a CMO, whatever, right? Do you agree with that definition or any other view? Who do you think are the stakeholders? Sorry? Almost everyone, right? So a customer, suppose you are in a bank and a customer, if I were a customer and trying to log in at 11:45 p.m. and I get a message that we are down for maintenance, how do I react? Not a pleasant thing, right? Again, as a customer, I try to change an airline ticket at 11 p.m. in the night, website not working. If you go to the call center, you have a wait for about, my personal highest is 75 minutes. I don't know if anyone has gone more than that. But then what do you think? Who would be responsible? Of course, when I say CIO or IT, it's probably the IT function that directly or indirectly impacts all the customers. Moving on to the employees, again, each employee would be a stakeholder, right? Particularly when we saw COVID and work from home, what was the biggest, other than saying, can you hear me, can you see me? Sorry. Okay, thank you. Other than all the often asked questions that can you hear me all right, can you see me all right? What was the other reason? I have a low bandwidth, right? Not working. Network issues, right? Almost everyone has faced it, right? So I think the challenge that we have as the CIOs, CTOs, IT leaders is that not only the whole world has changed. When you talk about a stakeholder, everybody is a stakeholder. We can't define, okay, this is, if I take care of these 3 stakeholders, I'm good. No way. That's not valid enough. So with that context, let me just put this in, but again, everyone make it interactive. Any questions? I know there's towards the end, but feel free to stop me right there and we can take examples as we go through. So with that, and I'll use a Gartner slide with the due credit to them. There was a CIO survey that they do every year. Many of you have seen the survey, but there is an increasing trend. We won't go too much into the numbers, but clearly, compared to the previous years, if we see, and I'm sure all of us in the room would violently agree with that, each one would be working very closely with the CEO. The previous session was about the board as well. So of course, there is a much more strategic aspect coming from a CIO relationship point of view. In terms of high impact initiatives, and I actually don't like a term, someone used to say IT is an enabling function. It's much more than that. It's very strategic today, and again, I'll probably explain using some examples that we see. It's much more strategic than ever before. So that's changing. And of course, in terms of educating, and that's probably a part that can rise to debates, What you assume people would know and people who do normally doesn't happen, right? Cloud sounds very nice to hear, but if you really want to do a cloud journey, you need to really educate the CFO in terms of, how it will help you save the cost, educate the CEO in terms of, how you can scale anything new, things like that. So there's a lot of education which is not usual for the CIOs earlier. They used to probably do run their functions, but I'm sure that has changed and it needs a lot more interface. Broad agreement, I presume? So with that, and there is one more dimension which I have tried to put in, is there is the internal landscape. When you talk about cost, when you talk about, moving to cloud, when you talk about changing the IT vendors or IT providers, there are things which are more internally focused, which are probably closely aligned to the CFOs and the lines of business. While the other one I just talked about, in terms of the external landscape, the customer service, right? The example I gave. Whatever that gentleman or the lady would be responsible for would actually be all the customers, right? And we see today that there are many companies who are moving from a B2B to a B2C model or a B2B2C model, right? Take insurance. We used to buy insurance. I mean, the generation before us, you would have seen an LIC agent, sorry, I won't name any brand, but an insurance agent coming and sitting and filling up the forms and taking the check and going away, right? Do we see them anymore? I'm sure they are there still. But a lot of the business have shifted to a direct to consumer. Any of us trying to buy any insurance, be it health, be it car, be it, foreign travel, we'll do it directly, direct to consumer, right? So the whole model of engagement has changed, and I think it's most critical for the IT organizations, to make sure that they are absolutely there in terms of the new ways of doing the business. When I say new ways of doing the business, there are two things. One is something that we have been doing as a company, change it to a digital model, or there are models which are digital native, was not there before, have been possible because of technology. And we need to make sure that both the cases are taken care of. With that, let's just take the direct relationship before we go into the other ones, which are probably more broad-based, right? Of course, in terms of CEO, there is no debate that his or her view would be how do we really use technology as a strategic differentiator. It's not just keeping the lights on. CEO won't be happy if you just keep the lights on. That's a table stake. Everyone does that. So how does technology help in terms of driving the strategic objectives of the company? Something that is probably the focus that the CIO, or what we are referring to as a transformational CIO, which all of us would want to be or are already. That's the focus that they would keep on going. In terms of CMO, and this is probably most often used, digital marketing. And anytime you talk about digital, probably the first thing goes to, okay, what's the digital presence of the company? And again, depends on whether you're a B2B or a B2C, but B2C is, of course, a lot more dominant in terms of the digital presence, and that's very critical. So how do you get that? CFO, of course, I'm smiling because of the budgets, right? I mean, there's a limited amount of money. Anytime you go to the CFO, the view would be, okay, you have a budget, you save some money and then use it for new projects. Anyone disagrees in the room? So I take the silence as agreement, right? So there is a finite amount of budget. There is a cost pressure, that almost everyone has gone through or would be going through. So how do you really repurpose? It's not about only if I get funding, then only I'll be able to upgrade or upskill the technology, but it has to be self-funded. Save something else, right? Do a cloud migration, retire something, or anything new, do on a cloud first mode, so that, you pay less and then, you have a multi-year plan. So those are the things that it can help with the CFOs. BUs is a very, very different area because, can't be generalized. A business unit in a retail company would be very different from a pharma, very different from manufacturing. So we cannot generalize, but one thing is very critical, that any industry we take, it has to be very, very clearly aligned to the business unit strategy. For example, if you're a retail company and you probably had a lot of physical stores trying to go digital, right? I mean, just creating a portal and making sure that transaction happens online is not good enough, right? You have to really figure out what kind of digital channel you would use, how do you attract the customer, how do you retain the customer. I'm sure many of you are customers for many digital channels, and many of you would have also, I mean, at least I have enrolled for quite a few, call it app or call it portals, but then have never visited that back again. And that percentage would be probably more than 50%. So how do you not only attract, but make sure if you're having a new channel, how do you do that? And that should be aligned to the business unit strategy. Retail is one example, and again, there are other areas which people can think of, and there are immense set of technologies that you can think of, right? One example I want to share in terms of how it helps in terms of the business units, and again, I won't name any brand, but let's talk about furnitures, right? I'm sure some of you would have bought furnitures online. Any bad experience anyone want to share? You got it in, then you realize it doesn't go well with the remaining items in the room. Nobody? Happened to me. So now when you see that again, without naming a brand, that you want to buy a furniture, you can actually use an AR, VR and see, if you place it in. Again, it depends, how you use it, but how does it go with the decor of the room? How does it go in terms of size? Probably you still cannot do, but it's a better user experience than just looking at a few still clips and trying to decide and buying. Just one example, in terms of how, if you're a retail and that kind of industry, how do you do that? The fifth one is board of directors. I think the previous session was all about the board, but I think the last two are, every board that I've come across or seen they are paranoid, right? I mean, these two are absolutely non-negotiable. Cybersecurity, and at least the industry we are in, or any industry, it has to be ahead of anything that can attack you, whatever be it, or viruses, ransomware, malware, whatever. No way. I mean, that's non-negotiable. Compliance. When you say compliance, and again, particularly in our industry, the whole data privacy, the regulations like GDPR, 𝗤𝗲𝗏, PII, PHI, HIPAA, everything. So again, depends on the industry, but those two are probably at the top of the mind for all the boards. And then of course, going back to the CEO agenda, how does it help the company in terms of a long-term strategic growth? Those would be the key areas. Again, a board would be hardly interested in terms of, looking at the uptime of the servers or uptime of the network. I mean, that's not a measure that they would look at, right? And finally, the vendors, and again, I don't like the word vendors. It's there still, but yeah, I mean, I take them as partners, right? It's not vendors, because if you treat them as vendors in terms of, getting some procurement done and paying them bills, then there is no strategy, right? What has worked well for us is, all the large partners or large suppliers, if I may call it that way, if we engage them in terms of something that we want to do proactively, and then them coming back with ideas, or them coming back with, POCs and things like that, we have found those ones to be much more successful than other cases when you just, okay, you have closed the bomb, give this to me, and then I'll manage the rest of it. That's the second scenario. The first scenario usually has been more successful. And that way, I think the partners would be a very key stakeholder for all the technology leaders way forward, because they would know, what, be it a software company, be it a hardware, be it a cloud provider, they would know what new they are doing. So when they know that, okay, this company is trying to do this, and you make it a 2+2 match, that's much better than just placing an order. So the partners, vendors, suppliers, whatever you call it, would continue to be key stakeholder. Any views? Okay, so if we move on, beyond that, as we started by saying, the employees and the customers, and of course, the shareholders. And there is no direct measure for the shareholders. I mean, it's probably reflected through the CEO and the board. But again, it's probably the measurement of how the company is perceived outside. You, especially, if you work for a company that touches lives, and you get to meet people and hear about your company, good or bad, that probably is indirect reflection of a shareholder perception, I would say, if not satisfaction, right? In terms of management technology quotient, what we have realized is, we have to figure out how that can, unless you show them, if you say, okay, this is a better cloud service, so what? Doesn't help me, right? If I'm talking to a BU head, he or she will not care, unless you show him or her what's the competitive advantage you can bring in. And what I wanted to share in this forum, I'm sure you would have done that, some of the recent trends, some technologies that you have either heard of course, all over all the media or social media, I must say, but may not be as much scaled up as yet. what I have personally realized is, if we can bring in somebody and show something that this is how it works, that probably gels very well with the stakeholder. I'll give an example of a blockchain, right? All of us know blockchain. How many of us would really say, okay, I have really implemented and scaled up blockchain as much as you would have liked to do? I'm sure all of you would have done something on blockchain. That's probably a given. But is it something that has scaled like, say, cloud technologies? The answer is no, right? Now, how do you talk to a BU or a business unit and tell that, okay, I want to use blockchain? How? The biggest challenge that we faced is, blockchain is multi-party, right? You and I cannot do blockchain, right? I cannot do blockchain with my suppliers. There is no use, right? It's a direct transaction. So unless you get the ecosystem in. So what we did, we actually, for us, shipping and logistics is one of the industries that we focus in. There is an established blockchain, by the way, that's with IBM. They have a blockchain solution called TradeLens, where there is like an ecosystem. Bring them in, show how it works, and then, there may still be a case, there may not be a case, but the point I'm trying to make is an industry example from someone who's already doing it, either in the same industry or in adjacent industry, often helps. Is it a sure shot case for success? The answer is no. You really still need to figure out how it help you or your business, but at least, that kind of, and that's why I'm calling it technology quotient, We all would know technology, but does the larger group of people, the business unit heads, the CFOs, do they understand? It's our job to make them understand. Again, if anyone disagrees, please raise a hand. Last one, employee, we talked about, in terms of, and again, we are seeing, millennials, we are seeing the, I don't know, have we run out of alphabets? Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, what next? Gen A, I don't know. But and again, we at WNS, we have a very high percentage in terms of millennials, and, so we need to make sure that how do you have a happier workforce? When you say happier, one is, of course, when you're trying to work, things should work the way it should work, with all the data privacy, with all the measurements that you can think of. Otherwise, also, what are the other things that you're doing? I'm sure, many companies did this in terms of, employee wellness programs, awareness, helping, or at least the young workforce that we have with health, with finance and things like that, session speakers, some channels and all that. Generally, that really adds on. And my point was, while we had in the previous page a set of defined stakeholders who have the defined roles, and as CIOs, CTOs, tech leaders, we can go and build our right stakeholder management, right relationship with them. The next stage is probably much broader in terms of all customers, all employees, anyone they know that probably comes and have any kind of interaction with you as a company. Moving on from there, how do you really do that? And again, it's not rocket science. I'm sure all of us are doing it knowingly, unknowingly, in a structured manner. But if I just put 5 key principles that I have followed in terms of actually engaging people, one is, of course, a very clear mission, in terms of what we are trying to do. And what we have often done in terms of any IT project, make sure that we define, what outcome we are looking at. And usually it's a business outcome. For any project, there is a technology outcome that we are looking at in terms of whatever tech parameters, cost, timelines and all that, but there's a business outcome that we are trying to measure, and we actually do that. If you are doing it in multiple phases, end of phase, go back, check if you are really delivering on the outcomes, and that has really helped. Again, this is different for different individuals, but set that mission that, okay, this is what we want to do. Second one is, a collaboration with the embedded functions. And this is important because when you're trying to, especially in digital world, when you're trying to do a project, the stakeholders are not just within the IT organization, right? The business unit, the HR, any other function, has to be equally savvy in terms of whatever you're trying to do. Otherwise, the project will not work, right? So how well you collaborate with the embedded functions, and to make sure that, they are not only, everybody knows and understands a digital way of doing things, but what you are trying to do, if you can explain to them, generally the collaboration works much better. So that's a second lever that we talk about. third one, and this can probably spark debates. And I'm sure if I present it in my organization also, there will be different views. There's no right or wrong. But what we have seen, at least these days, the teams, once you form the team, set a mission, put the collaboration in place, it's actually best for them to figure out on their own rather than trying to dictate terms and what do you call that? I mean, monitor each step and micromanage, that's the word, right? I think in the digital world with the new ways of working, anyone who's trying to micromanage will not succeed. You can shoot me for the statement, but I think many of you would agree that with the kind of people we have today, the kind of technologies available, if you give it to them as a task, they will come up with a solution. And many times we have seen that, something that probably was not even on the agenda or on the table before, comes up from someone, and very unlikely, it probably comes up from the junior-most employee. So it's a reverse thing, it's a reverse order. Someone who's new, has got an open mind and broad set of ideas, brings in something which you realize, oh, that's a nice way of doing things. So that's again, that doesn't mean that you leave it to them and you come back after 3 months and check what's happening. You can't do that. So depending on what kind of, we all have been in multiple steering committees for sure. But where you are steering, is important. But that's the right mix of autonomy versus governance is something that's very critical. And I think that balance is, there's no rule book for that. It has to be depending on what kind of project you're doing. What is it for a BU? If it is for an organization, of course, you need to engage many more people. But that's one critical balance that we all need to do. Fourth one is business sponsorship, right? No matter, as the CIO, CTO, if you shout from the rooftop or send one auto email every day saying, okay, this is very critical for us, do you think that will work? It will not work unless you have the business buy-in, and in terms of making sure that the business unit or business owners give the right amount of attention. I personally seen many projects fail because, yes, there is a stakeholder buy-in at the business unit head level, but then he or she refuses to give the team that should be there, right? All of you would agree, functional specs not done, what do you do with the developers? Not much, right? Unless you know that, this is what we need to do. So that functional, I won't call it alignment, it's a strong engagement, which is very, very critical. And if you do not have that sponsorship, it won't work. It can still be okay for keep the lights on, but anything strategic, anything different, a new digital model, a direct-to-consumer product will not work unless you have that kind of ownership coming in from the business. And the last one, what we call as active support from the centralized team. Centralized team is more like, and of course, CIOs are centralized teams, who would probably have some people in shared service and some people in dedicated to the BUs. What my experience says is, while you can support a BU, but it has to be, like a squad that particular BU is running particular initiative or particular strategic engagement, support them, not just IT, but all other functions also, right? To make sure that you have a right balance. And there are two things, one is, of course, the central teams helps in terms of ensuring there's a best practice. Otherwise, if you have a fully decentralized model, everyone does their own applications, you will have a complete mix of things which really doesn't work. If you do it the other way, that okay, only the central function will do it, you will have a long list of projects that can take 36 months or 48 months to do, which nobody has the patience to do. In my, I won't say earlier life, this life only, but earlier days I used to run ERP practices. It was not unusual for me to have a multi-million-dollar SAP implementation that will go on for 3 years, global rollout. I'm sure many of you have seen that, right? Today, do you see anybody talking about a 3-year IT project? Very unlikely. They won't do that because it's not just agile. You need to do that into bite-size pieces, get the results, show the benefit, and then move on, right? So my personal definition is, it's like Lego blocks. You have something, the core enterprise systems will stay. They won't go away anywhere, right? That's a core that's running. All the digital agenda that we are trying to add is, is like Lego blocks. You can expand, as you go forward. And to do that expansion, what we saw now is something that might help as a framework. I'll pause here. Any comments, views, questions, are most welcome.
Do we have any questions?
Or comments. It need not be a question always, questions are always difficult to get, but anyone wants to share any experience that they can relate to? Please. Can you give him a mic?
Team control center that you said, right? Could you expand that on a little bit? Is that a IT only team? Is that a combined team which has BU and business functions and IT together? How do you envision that?
Okay, so that's why I have not defined it. Can be an IT team, right? Or the best example I can say, the word we can relate to is the COEs, right? You have a data COE, analytics COE, right? So which is not dedicated for any particular business unit, right? And why I'm using the word central team, maybe you can replace roughly as a COE, because if it is for every business unit to find out how they should do, when you have a central team or a COE, they can come in and at least help set the framework, and then you can go on your own path. But read it as loosely defined term. I have not called it only as IT because it can be IT, it can be data. Sometimes is within the IT organization. Sometimes you may have a chief data officer who's outside, right? There can be other things like research. Some of the new digital models when you're trying to do, you need a lot of research work to be done, right? Whether a direct-to-consumer model will help you or not. So those kind of functions which are to help BU but not dedicated for a particular business unit is the loose definition that I use for a central team. Make sense? Okay. Anyone else, please? Yeah.
See, existing enterprises invested a lot of millions in the existing environment. So in order to do the transformation, what are the key 3 points? Why? Because the transformation should have the ROI. You covered it has to have a significant returns when they are doing it. But as you present, I missed the first part. But what are the key 3 disciplines we have to follow apart to this in the business strategy perspective?
Okay, I'll answer that, but I missed the first part of your question. You said what is existing is the enterprise systems. Did you mean that?
Yeah, legacy systems.
Legacy, okay, fair. So I think, for a transformation and you asked me for 3, so I'll probably give you 3 different levers. One, of course, is, what's the business outcome you're looking at, right? Are you trying to grow your customers? Are you trying to grow top line? Are you trying to improve your customer advocacy? So there has to be a clear business outcome that you should do. That's one, right? Second point, which I would say in terms of transformation is, first you try it out. There's a word called fail fast, right? If it doesn't work, you fail early rather than, doing the whole thing and then figuring out. So essentially it's first pilot and then scale. There are many projects when you just try to boil the ocean and then, you realize, okay, you are really not there. So there's a second point that, look, try small, try it with one unit or one group, and then if it succeeds, do that. And the third one, which was my parting comment, the whole interoperability. There are teams who are working on transformation, looks very good in isolation, but when you say, okay, how does it come back and work in the mainstream, when you talk about APIs integration, one single view, there are many projects that fall flat. So anytime you want to do transformation, going back to your first point on legacy, I'm a big fan of interoperability. Without that interoperability, without the end-to-end view, I don't think any transformation can be successful. So, the business outcomes, when you scale and how you interoperate, if you get these 3 dimensions addressed, I think it will be pretty successful transformation. You agree? Okay. Anyone else? Okay, if not, and certainly I don't know how I'm doing with time, but thank you for being a patient audience, and I'm sure we'll have more discussion way forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, sir.